"You can't just put a hot tub here," I shouted, slamming my truck door as I stormed across the gravel lot. A woman in a wide-brimmed visor sipping wine from a plastic cup looked at me like I was the problem. "Karen said it's community property now," she shrugged, sliding deeper into the bubbling tub that was sitting somehow right in the middle of my private storage lot. It was 8:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. I hadn't even had my coffee. That was the exact moment I knew I was at war. The chaos didn't start with the hot tub. That was just the grand finale in a week-long spiral of ridiculousness. It all started the Saturday before when I returned from a weekend supply run. I run a small contracting business in a rural town where everybody knows everybody, or at least they used to. I, Mike, inherited my dad's fenced lot on the edge of town, a quiet place where I kept my tools, trailers, lumber, and backup generators. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. At least it used to feel like mine until I pulled in that day and found a shiny black Lexus parked diagonally across my lumber stack. At first, I thought someone had just made a mistake. A delivery driver maybe. Then I saw the second car. Then the third. By the time I made it to the center of the lot, I counted 9 vehicles. None of them were mine. Some had HOA guest parking signs on the dashboards. One had pool noodles sticking out the window like it was headed for a beach. I stood there confused until I saw a folding table with bottled water, a Bluetooth speaker blasting early 2000s pop music, and a banner duct taped to my fence that said, "Reserved for HOA fun." I nearly choked on my own disbelief. That's when I heard the voice I'd come to dread, nasal, high-pitched, and commanding. "You're going to have to move your truck. We've got a birthday party coming in an hour." There she was, Karen, pink sweater wrapped over her shoulders, clipboard in hand, and a smug little smile that screamed, "You're not going to do anything about it." She marched over like she owned the whole zip code and started waving her arms like she was directing traffic. "This area is now designated as auxiliary recreation space under community rights of shared access," she said, as if reciting law from the Book of Entitlement. "You're welcome to use it too, of course, as long as you check the sign-up sheet in advance." Sign-up sheet? For my land? I didn't even respond at first. I just walked toward the gate, checking the lock. My heavy-duty chain was hanging limp on the side. The padlock had been replaced. I tried the keypad. Nothing. They had changed the entire locking system. Panic turned to rage as I looked around and saw random strangers strolling through my property like it was a town square. A teenager skateboarded past me and did a trick off my tool chest. A dog peed on my ladder. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth hurt. I spun around and barked, "How did you even get in here?" "Who changed my lock?" Karen smiled sweetly. "We voted. The HOA board authorized a key distribution for overflow access. You'd know that if you came to meetings. I left you a memo." I was speechless. First of all, I don't live in the HOA. I've never lived in the HOA. My property sits just outside its jurisdiction, a fact I've reminded Karen of at least 4 times since she became self-declared president last year. She once fined me for having an American flag that was too large. I laughed it off back then. That was a mistake. She saw my expression and assumed it meant weakness. This will all blow over soon. "We're just trying to build community spirit," she added, patting me on the arm. I jerked away. I drove to the sheriff's office and tried to file a report, but they told me it was a civil matter and that unless there was damage or violence, they couldn't do much. One deputy chuckled and said, "You know that HOA. You're the 5th person this month who's come in about them. Good luck." That night, I couldn't sleep. My property had been invaded, the lock replaced, and my space turned into a tailgate party without my consent. I rewatched the footage from the single working camera I had installed months ago. At 2:17 a.m., 3 people entered with bolt cutters and a box of what looked like new locks. One of them was Karen, clear as daylight. I didn't just get mad. I got strategic. The next morning, I parked a lawn chair in front of the entrance and sat there with a GoPro on my chest, filming everyone who came and went. I politely asked every person who entered who gave them access. They all said the same thing. Karen gave us a key. Some even showed me the keys freshly printed with tags marked HOA Overflow Lot Access. One guy tried to tell me the lot was now considered public resource under new HOA guidelines. I asked him if the HOA also owned my social security number. By noon, I had collected statements, license plates, and photos. But the cherry on top was when Karen showed up again, this time with a cooler of orange slices and a pinata. "Birthday bash in full swing," she sang. That's when I noticed a stack of folding chairs leaning against my generator. That was it. I stood up, grabbed my phone, and called a locksmith. Not just any locksmith, my cousin Bobby, a guy who owed me a favor from back when I helped him build his garage. Within 3 hours, Bobby had installed a digital smart lock with remote override, a silent alarm system, and reinforced brackets. By the time Karen returned from helping cut the cake, the lot was sealed tighter than Fort Knox. No key she passed out would work again. At 5:42 p.m., she came back, jiggled the new lock, and immediately began screaming like someone had stolen her cat. She yelled into her phone, paced in circles, and banged her clipboard against the gate. I watched from my truck across the street, sipping a root beer and filming the whole meltdown. She had no idea what was coming next, and honestly, neither did the 14 people whose cars were still parked inside, because in the morning, I was calling the tow truck. The morning air was crisp, but the tension simmering in my chest felt like a slow boil. I stood at the edge of my now secured storage lot, staring at the mess Karen and her army had left behind. Abandoned folding chairs, half-eaten cupcakes, and someone's pink flamingo pool float were still wedged behind one of my tool trailers. But none of that compared to what was parked on my land. 14 vehicles, lined up like they were in some HOA-sponsored car show. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was methodical. I had spent the night compiling every scrap of evidence I had gathered, labeling the license plates, and matching them with time-stamped video footage. I had everything. And now I had a plan. The first step was calling the towing company. Not the sleepy little local service that took 3 days to respond to a call. I needed the guys who handled impound lots for the city. Big rigs, fast dispatch, no nonsense. I explained the situation, emailed them proof of property ownership, and forwarded images of the vehicles along with a notarized letter stating they were unauthorized. The guy on the phone paused for a second and said, "Wait, you're the hot tub guy." Apparently, the video of Karen's meltdown from the previous day had already made the rounds online. I didn't even post it. Someone else must have recorded her shrieking about how community property law supersedes capitalist greed. The towing dispatcher chuckled and said, "We'll be there in an hour with 3 trucks." While I waited, I set up a folding chair just outside the gate again, same as yesterday, only now I had my phone mounted on a tripod. I wanted everything documented. This was about justice, not revenge. Well, maybe a little of both. As the sun climbed higher, the first tow truck pulled up, followed by 2 more. Each driver got out, looked at the lot, whistled blow, and gave me a nod. Within minutes, chains were clanking, wheels were being hoisted, and one by one, those unauthorized vehicles were lifted from my property like discarded toys. That's when the real show began. At 9:47 a.m., a gray Subaru screeched to a halt in front of the lot. A woman in tennis shoes and a robe came stumbling out, waving her arms like she was guiding an airplane. "Stop, stop. That's my car. I only parked here for my morning walk." The tow truck driver, calm as a monk, showed her the posted signage and the paperwork. She turned to me with wild eyes. "Karen said we could park here." I didn't even blink. "Karen doesn't own this land." "I do, and I didn't give anyone permission." She screamed something incoherent, filmed a shaky video of herself declaring a civil rights violation, and then sped off, still barefoot. The next few hours were more of the same. One by one, people arrived, panicked, cursed, pleaded, and even offered me bribes to stop the tows. A man in a golf shirt offered me 2 tickets to a country club if I let it slide. I asked him if his club allowed trespassing. He didn't reply. Around 11:15 a.m., a bright blue Tesla began honking furiously as it pulled up. Karen, of course. I could see her mouth already forming a scream before she even stepped out of the car. She jumped out, phone recording, yelling about legal violations and fascist parking enforcement. The irony would have been hilarious if it wasn't so maddening. She marched up to the gate, which was now locked tight behind a freshly welded steel bracket, and waved her phone in my face. "This is harassment. You'll be sued for emotional trauma." I held up my own phone and calmly said, "Smile for the camera, Karen. You're trespassing again." She jabbed her finger toward one of the tow trucks that had just hooked up her precious electric SUV. "Put that down. That's a green certified vehicle. You can't tow electric cars. They're part of the climate initiative." The driver didn't even look up. "Ma'am, I tow whatever I'm paid to tow. If it's on private property and unauthorized, it's gone." Karen was livid. She tried calling the sheriff again, demanding immediate intervention. When they arrived, I calmly handed them my full documentation, photos, videos, and the updated legal notice I had posted at every entrance. One of the deputies looked over everything, then turned to Karen and said, "Ma'am, he's within his rights. And also, this is the third complaint we've had about you this month. Maybe it's time to stop giving out keys to land that isn't yours." Karen stood frozen, her face turning the color of bad wine. Then she pivoted with dramatic flair, pointed at me, and hissed, "This isn't over." I replied, "I hope not. I'm starting to enjoy this." The deputy actually chuckled. By early afternoon, all 14 cars were gone. I walked the perimeter with the tow truck guys, shook hands, and thanked them for their swift work. One of them asked if he could take a photo in front of the private storage. "Unauthorized vehicles will be towed" sign to post online. I said, "Sure, as long as you tag it #Karen Chronicles." As the trucks rolled off with their final loads, the lot felt different. Not just empty, but mine again. It was quiet, clean, peaceful. But I knew it wouldn't last. Karen wasn't the type to walk away quietly, especially not after losing face in front of her HOA worshippers. That's why I had one more surprise in the works. That evening, I met with my cousin Bobby again. We mapped out plans to install a full perimeter security system with motion detectors, solar-powered spotlights, and a speaker system that would blare pre-recorded warnings whenever someone tried to enter without a code. I also ordered a massive oak sign to mount near the gate. On it, in bright red engraved lettering, it would read, "Private property, not HOA land. Trespassers will be towed." I sat back that night in my recliner, rewatching the day's footage. Karen screaming, people bargaining, the sweet whine of tow cables pulling her empire of entitlement off my land. It was poetic, but I knew this was only round one. The war was far from over. Karen was going to strike back, and when she did, I'd be ready. What she didn't realize was that every time she escalated, I was 10 steps ahead. Because while she was busy playing petty queen of the neighborhood, I was playing long game chess, and I just captured 14 of her pawns in one move. By the next morning, Karen's social life had combusted like a backyard propane grill with the lid slammed shut. The footage from my lot, where she screamed about climate initiatives and tried to stop the towing of her electric SUV, had hit local Facebook groups like wildfire. Within hours, someone edited it with circus music. People laughed. People shared. But Karen was furious. And when Karen is furious, she doesn't retreat. She retaliates. I knew that well. What I didn't expect was how wildly unprepared she was for the storm she was about to create for herself. It started with a letter. No knock on the door. No email. No phone call. Just a neatly folded legal document slid under my workshop door sometime before dawn, printed on HOA letterhead. At the top, bold as brass, "Cease and desist notice." I opened it, expecting amateur dramatics, and I wasn't disappointed. It accused me of reckless endangerment of community property, emotional harassment, and my personal favorite, unauthorized removal of vehicles belonging to dues-paying members of the community. There was even a signature at the bottom, Karen M. Dillard, acting president. Underneath, scribbled in red pen, she'd written, "You messed with the wrong lady." What Karen failed to realize, or willfully ignored, was that I had already spoken to an attorney the day the towing started. My cousin Lucas, who works in land use and civil litigation, had been quietly building a file for me. I called him the moment I read the letter, and after a few minutes of laughter on his end, he said, "Let her file. I've got a counterclaim that'll knock the frosting off her cupcakes." It was nice having backup, but that didn't mean Karen was slowing down. She filed the lawsuit the very next day. Small claims court, citing damages to her reputation and the destruction of community trust. It was laughable on its face, but Karen knew the game wasn't just legal. It was public. That same evening, she held an emergency HOA meeting at the local recreation center. Flyers were taped all over the neighborhood. Some even slipped into mailboxes. Community alert. Unlawful actions by non-HOA member threaten our shared spaces. She made it sound like I torched a playground. I wasn't invited to the meeting, but I went anyway. Sat in the back, arms crossed, listening as Karen gave a full presentation with printed slides and dramatic pauses. She called me a rogue landholder, compared my actions to vigilant justice, and at one point claimed I had militarized private property against peaceful residents. When someone in the audience asked why she handed out keys to land she didn't control, she brushed it off. "We had an agreement in spirit," she said, as if that meant anything. Someone else asked who paid for the locksmith. She stumbled over her answer, finally mumbling something about administrative funds. That was when things shifted. A few HOA members started whispering to each other. One stood up and asked, "Wait, did you use our dues to pay for locks on land you don't own?" Karen froze for a half second too long. Then she turned the blame. I was acting in the best interest of the community. I assumed the space was unused. It was ugly, cluttered. A man in the second row stood and said, "Cluttered or not, you don't get to give away access to property you don't own. That's illegal. That's not leadership." I decided to speak. I stood slowly, clearing my throat. People turned, surprised to see me. Karen's face went pale. "If anyone here is unclear about who owns the lot," I said, holding up the deed, "I've got the paperwork right here. I also have video footage of your HOA president trespassing, cutting locks, and using your funds for unauthorized access. And tomorrow, I'll be filing a separate case, not because I want money, but because I want this madness to stop." You could hear a pin drop, then murmuring, then shouting. Someone demanded a vote to remove Karen as acting president. She protested, shouted about needing quorum, but people were fed up. The meeting spiraled into chaos. A guy with a golf visor yelled about transparency. A woman shouted that her son's bike was stolen from the lot during Karen's pool party. The treasurer looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Karen stormed out before the vote even happened. Later that night, I received a call from one of the HOA board members, a guy named Mitchell who ran the neighborhood watch. He apologized on behalf of the board and said a special vote was scheduled for the next evening. "A lot of us thought Karen was just a little pushy," he said, "but this went too far. She used the HOA like her own private army." I told him I appreciated the honesty, but I had no intention of backing down. I'd spent too long letting people like Karen walk all over the quiet ones. The next day, the vote was unanimous. Karen was removed as acting president, and the board publicly disavowed her use of funds. But that didn't stop her from trying one last stunt. That afternoon, I got an alert on my phone from the motion sensors at my lot. Someone was near the gate. I pulled up the live stream, and there she was, Karen herself, pacing in front of the fence with a hammer in one hand and a zippered bag in the other. She muttered to herself, then knelt down, trying to pry off the new lock. I drove there in 10 minutes flat. When I pulled up, I didn't even get out of the truck. I just rolled down the window and said, "This is trespassing. You're on camera." She jumped, dropped the hammer, and screamed, "You're ruining everything." That lot was supposed to be a space for people, for the community. I stayed calm. Then maybe next time, ask permission before turning someone else's property into a circus. She didn't respond, just stood there seething, eyes wet with rage before finally walking away. I sent the footage to Lucas that night, and he added it to the case. But more importantly, I uploaded a small clip to my personal page. Just Karen in the dead of afternoon holding a hammer and trying to break into my gate, with a caption that read, "When you lose the HOA presidency but still think you're queen." The clip went viral by morning again, and this time, even Karen's loyalists couldn't defend her. She wasn't just overreaching, she was unraveling. But the real surprise was still to come, because just when I thought this saga had reached peak absurdity, I received a call from the city zoning office. Someone had submitted a claim that my storage lot was a hazard zone, and guess who had filed it? Karen was still fighting, but she didn't realize it yet. She had just picked her final battle, and she was bringing a rubber sword to a tank war. The letter from the city zoning office arrived folded in an envelope that looked too formal to ignore. It was crisp, official, and stamped with a seal that immediately sent a wave of annoyance through my chest. I opened it standing over my workbench, covered in grease and wood shavings, and scanned the contents with disbelief. According to the notice, my storage lot had been flagged for code violations related to unsanitary conditions, obstructive waste accumulation, and unauthorized commercial activity. There was even a warning that failure to comply with inspection orders could lead to fines or, in extreme cases, forced closure. At the bottom of the form, in tiny print, I saw it, a single name listed under reporting party, Karen Dillard. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictably pathetic. Karen had officially run out of HOA ammo and was now trying to weaponize the city government against me. It was a desperate move, and a risky one, especially given how clean I'd kept the property since upgrading everything. The lot was orderly, locked up tight, and fully within county zoning guidelines for privately owned contractor storage. Still, I wasn't taking any chances. I spent the rest of the afternoon sweeping up debris, organizing lumber stacks, and pressure washing the front gravel lane just for good measure. I wanted the place to gleam. 2 days later, the inspector showed up, a guy named Randy who had the permanent squint of someone who didn't want to be there. He wore steel-toe boots and carried a clipboard with pages flapping in the wind. "Afternoon," he mumbled. "Got a complaint about the condition of the property. Mind if I take a look?" I nodded and unlocked the gate. As he walked around, I explained the situation, and his raised eyebrows told me he'd already heard bits of it. "Oh, you're the fellow with the hot tub invasion and the car parade, right?" I smiled and said, "You've seen the videos." He chuckled and said, "My wife watches them on Facebook every night like a soap opera." Randy walked the perimeter slowly, checked everything against his checklist, and finally sighed. "Honestly, this is cleaner than most sites I inspect. Nothing hazardous, no waste, no overflow. You even have labeled bins." He scribbled something on the form, tore off a carbon copy, and handed it to me. "All clear. No violations. Just ignore the noise. Happens more than you think. People with personal grudges using the system to stir up trouble." I thanked him, shook his hand, and watched him drive off. A small victory, but an important one. Karen must have gotten the news fast, because the next morning she was back. Not sneaking around, not hurling accusations, but standing calmly just outside the fence, holding a flyer in her hand. I spotted her from the workshop and walked out slowly, arms folded, expecting another performance. But this was something else. She looked tired. Her hair was frizzy. Her eyes were bagged, and her voice had lost that sharp edge. She extended the flyer toward me and said, "You win. I'm moving." I took the paper. It was a listing for her house, up for sale by owner, priced high and described as in a peaceful HOA-managed neighborhood. I scanned the words, then looked at her. "Why tell me?" I asked. She shrugged. "Because you'll hear it from someone else anyway. And because I'm tired. This community's turned on me. People stare, whisper. I've lost everything I tried to build here." I didn't say anything for a moment. Part of me wanted to gloat, to remind her how this all started with her trying to control something she didn't own. But another part of me saw a woman who had burned every bridge around her and was finally realizing that her house was made of gasoline. As she turned to leave, she hesitated and added, "You know, I really thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was helping people." I looked at her dead on. Helping people doesn't mean steamrolling them. It doesn't mean stealing land, breaking locks, or dragging everyone into your fantasy of control. She didn't respond. She walked off, the flyer fluttering slightly in her hand. That weekend, Karen began moving her things. Her garage sale looked more like an escape. Half her furniture was out on the lawn. People were picking through framed quotes about leadership and decorative flamingo statues, and Karen looked like she was just trying to disappear. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The neighborhood was already talking. The same people who used to support her were now avoiding eye contact. She had become her own cautionary tale, but even with Karen fading out, her pettiness wasn't quite finished. On her final day, as the moving truck loaded up, I got another motion alert from my lot camera. I checked the feed and had to pause. There she was, one last time, tossing 2 garbage bags over the fence and onto my gravel. I got in my truck and drove over, pulling up just as she was climbing into the passenger seat of a beat-up sedan. She saw me, didn't say a word, and closed the door. I walked over to the trash bags and opened them. Inside were rotting bananas, half-empty pickle jars, and random plastic forks. It wasn't about garbage. It was a message. A childish final flick of the wrist to say, I still got the last word. I laughed out loud, not out of anger, but sheer disbelief. Even in defeat, Karen needed to throw one last tantrum. I picked up the bags and tossed them into my own bin. Then I looked into the camera and gave a casual thumbs up. Later that night, I clipped the footage and posted it with the title, Karen's Parting Gift, a trashy goodbye. It didn't explode online the way her earlier stunts did, but it didn't need to. People already knew the story. Her legacy was sealed. After that, it felt like peace had finally settled back into my life. I stood in the center of my now empty, secure lot, looked around, and smiled. It had taken weeks of conflict, stress, and sheer absurdity, but I had reclaimed my space. No more hot tubs. No more clipboards. No more HOA keys mysteriously appearing in strangers' hands. The gates were mine again. The silence was mine again. And for the first time in a while, I could breathe easy. I started sketching new ideas for the space. A tool library for local tradesmen, a tiny garden corner for veterans who needed a place to relax, maybe even a barbecue pit for occasional neighborhood get-togethers. By invitation only, of course. I wasn't turning into Karen. I just wanted to remind people what real community actually looked like. Karen had left the neighborhood, but the mark she'd made, the lessons she taught by way of her own downfall, would stick around much longer than her pink blazer or laminated HOA flyers ever did. And as strange as it was to admit, I was grateful for it, because without her chaos, I wouldn't have fortified my lot, exposed the rotten underbelly of the HOA board, or gained the strange internet cult following I now had thanks to a few viral videos. But the story wasn't over yet, because just when I thought everything had calmed down, I got a call from the towing company. They had an interesting piece of news about what happened to Karen's impounded SUV, and the twist? It was about to put the cherry on top of this whole bizarre saga. The call from the towing company came just after lunch. I was eating a sandwich on the tailgate of my truck, enjoying the rare moment of silence after weeks of chaos, when my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed the name of the impound yard I had worked with to tow all those unauthorized cars off my lot. I figured maybe it was just paperwork or a billing question, but the voice on the other end had a tone too cheerful for that. "Hey, Mike, you're not going to believe this, man," the guy said, half laughing. "You remember that electric SUV we hauled out? The one the lady with the clipboard kept screaming about." I told him I remembered it clearly. He said, "Well, it's about to go to auction. She never paid the impound fees, never tried to reclaim it. So unless someone buys it at the auction next week, it'll be eligible for donation. You interested?" I blinked. "You're saying I could legally end up with Karen's car?" He chuckled. "If you bid on it, yeah. Or if no one else wants it, we could help you process the paperwork as a donation. She signed away all rights by ignoring the notices. It's basically an orphan vehicle now." I couldn't believe it. The universe had a strange sense of humor, and apparently I was its favorite sitcom that week. I told him I'd think about it. That night, I couldn't stop laughing at the idea. After all the drama, the shouting, the flyers, the fake lockouts, and sabotage. Karen's prized SUV had become an unclaimed relic. She'd left town so fast she either forgot about it or was too prideful to face the process of getting it back. Either way, it was poetic. So I called the towing yard back the next day and said I'd take it. On one condition. I wanted to donate it to a local charity that helped veterans get back on their feet. The guy on the phone was thrilled. Done. We'll get the papers processed and drop it off where you need. The next weekend, I arranged a small handoff ceremony with the local vet outreach center. I cleaned the car up myself, polished the hood, and even printed out a little plaque that read, "Donated with gratitude by Mike and a Karen who made it possible." They laughed and shook my hand. The SUV went to a recently returned vet who needed transportation to get to a new job. He was stunned. I told him the story, leaving out some of the pettier details, and he shook his head and said, "Man, I thought I'd seen weird back on base. This beats it." After that, things really did quiet down. The neighborhood returned to normal, or at least its version of normal. The HOA board, newly reorganized without Karen at the helm, sent me a letter, an actual polite one, apologizing for everything and formally acknowledging that my property was outside their jurisdiction. They even offered to pay for one of the security cameras I had installed. I declined, but I appreciated the gesture. We weren't friends, but at least we weren't enemies anymore. I started working on the lot itself. Without the chaos, I finally had the headspace to make it into something better. I cleared a section for a neighborhood tool exchange, where local tradespeople could borrow or lend equipment. I set up a bench under a small awning and planted some low-maintenance greenery around the fence. And in the center of it all, I mounted a new wooden sign, oak, hand-carved, bolted deep into the gravel. It read, "Private property. Respect it or be towed." And yes, we're still watching. The sign became a bit of a local joke. People would drive by just to take selfies with it. Some brought coffee and just sat on the bench to chat. It was strange but nice how something that started in petty conflict ended in building a better space. One elderly neighbor even came by and said, "I never thought I'd say this, but I kind of missed the drama. At least you handled it with class." Then, about a month after Karen vanished, a moving truck pulled into her old driveway. A new couple stepped out, quiet, polite, kept to themselves. No flyers, no clipboards, just smiles and a "hey there" when I passed by. It was a new chapter, and I was glad to see it start. But part of me still wondered what became of Karen. Rumor had it she moved 2 towns over to a gated community. Someone said she got into a fight at a PTA meeting her first week there. Another rumor said she tried to take over the neighborhood Facebook group and got banned within 3 days. Whatever the truth, I had no interest in following her story anymore. She was someone else's problem now. One night, as I sat by the lot gate with a cold drink and watched the sunset pour gold over the rooftops, I thought about how far things had come, not just with Karen, but with everything. I'd always thought I was the kind of guy who didn't get involved, who kept to himself and let other people deal with drama. But sometimes the drama parks itself right in your driveway and sets up a hot tub on your gravel. And when that happens, you can either walk away or you can dig in, stand up, and take your space back inch by inch. The funny thing was, in fighting for my land, I found something else I didn't expect. I found a stronger sense of community, not because people rallied behind me, but because the whole thing forced all of us to see where the lines really were, legal, personal, and moral. People got honest. The fake smiles stopped. And in the end, we had something better than HOA rules or laminated flyers. We had actual respect. As the sky dimmed and the lot lights clicked on automatically, I looked at the camera feed on my phone. No movement, no alerts, no chaos, just quiet, peaceful. I smiled and leaned back in my chair, feeling more at home than I had in years. The war was over. The land was mine. And Karen? Well, Karen had given me the best parting gift I never asked for. A story people would be telling around here for years. And if anyone ever forgot how it all began, I kept the video clips handy just in case.